Hello, people. Today, my guest is Joel Bast. He's a world renowned researcher in the different fields of statistics and a lot of sociology and crime. It's very interesting topics he's been researching. He wrote a few books that we've been talking about. He wrote quite a few research papers on the different topics of from drug crime to white collar crime, but in my personal opinion, what I'm the most curious about are his takes on statistics, how they are used, how they can be misused. And he wrote that awesome book about it, Damn It Lies and Statistics. I think it's awesome to have you here. Joel, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me, to be a guest on this little show. And maybe we should start by you giving my viewers just a little summary of your work, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I'm a sociologist. I have specialized in what I think of as the sociology of social problems. And what I mean by that is how and why we worry about particular things, when we do. Why is it that one year our attention may be focused on, problem X, and a year later, somehow that's fallen off our radar screen and we're worrying about problems Y or Z or whatever. And, so I've been interested in trying to study that. And that becomes a license for me to look at almost anything. I've written about poisoned Halloween candy. I've written about missing children, and on and on and on. And, one of the things that runs through this is I'm interested in the rhetoric that people use. How do they explain what's going on? And how do they explain that this is a problem and this is the sort of problem it is? And an important part of that rhetoric in modern society is the use of numbers, of statistics, so that people are saying, okay, this is true. I know it's true because I've got some number that I can wave at you and tell you that it's correct.
That's a very interesting thing, as you said. It's about what I thought so interesting about your work was creating a narrative is something that many entities do, from a company in their marketing campaign over political entities to NGOs and NPOs that want to create consciousness, awareness about issues. Now, without any moral value now, I'm not speaking if it's a good thing or bad thing. I just like to talk about the method in itself. And as you said, getting numbers is a very important part of all of this. Like, is it 1% of people who have this issue? Is it 50% of people? And another thing that you mentioned is also how often and in what way is it repeated and presented? And that's like, how could you of course, as you said, it's a huge amount of topics, but is there any, where I would say, abstraction of method or way that things are chosen and presented to make them more pressing or more interesting or more important? Are there some commonalities to get something to be in the brain of the people?
Well, I think the key thing to understand is that is a word that you just used, choice. Anytime someone's making an argument, they're choosing what they want to say. They're choosing how to make the case. And they're choosing whether to use numbers, which numbers to use, how to use them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a tendency, I think, to think about numbers as facts. Okay. Now, in the United States, school children in about third grade have a unit that's sometimes called facts and opinions. And the idea is that you'll be told that there are two kinds of statements that people think are true. And one kind is a fact, and a fact is really, really true. Okay. There are 50 states in the United States is a fact. Okay. And then other statements are statements that you may think are true, and you may believe it's true, but another person of goodwill could think that something else is true. You know, I might say The Godfather Part Two is the greatest American movie, and somebody else might say no, it's Citizen Kane, or Animal House, or whatever it is. And when you take that unit in third grade, at the end of the unit, you get a little test. The test will say, here are a bunch of sentences, circle, is this a fact or an opinion? And one of the things you're going to realize in third grade is if there's a number there, it's a fact. Okay, there are 50 states in the United States, and you circle fact. And so we tend to assume that numbers are like little rocks. They're like, they're little chunks of reality that you could pick up the way that a rock collector picks up stones. Okay, and they're just out there in the world. And a far, far better metaphor would be to say that numbers are like jewels. Okay, if you take a picture of, or you look for pictures on the internet of raw rubies or raw diamonds or whatever, they don't look like anything. They look like regular old rocks. And somebody has to take that rock and they have to cut it in particular ways and polish it. And then they place it in a setting so that you look at it from a certain kind of angle. And suddenly you have a jewel. Okay. And, the statistics are like on to that. Somebody has decided to count something. They've figured out how they're going to go about counting it. They've figured out what they want to count, and then they're saying, okay, when you look at what the data that I found, here's the data that I want to highlight for you, that you'll understand is important. So it's not that it's not true. It's not that it isn't a fact, but it is the case that, the raw diamond is a diamond, just like the polished diamond. Okay. But there's a lot of work that goes into producing that thing that we recognize as a jewel. And similarly, there's a lot of work that goes into producing a statistic. And, we need to understand that these numbers aren't just out there. It's not that somebody just reached out and pulled out this number and said, here it is, here's a little chunk of reality. It is, they're making choices about how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting take is, I know that from my experience personally, I think way too few people are taught about how numbers can be used to shift narratives, how to create narratives, and how to influence people. I've got two easy examples for that, just for the use. For example, I don't know if you know that. It was like someone I know that I worked with was like, oh, we've got top 1% podcasts worldwide. And then which was factually true. By the way, he defined top 1%. He defined it by numbers of episodes. And he found out, 99% don't have more than 10 episodes. So he was in the top 1% with 20 episodes. Factually true, but not what people would have in mind. And the second example that was the example which got me to your work, honestly. It was a friend of mine told me that example during a meeting, and he recommended me to read your book. And it was a question about doctors. It was like, okay, you go to surgery. If you tell people, hey, this surgery has a 90% survival rate, they'll think, oh, cool, everything's fine. Oh, everything's great. But if you tell them, hey, there's a 10% chance you die, suddenly, oh my God, this surgery, oh my God, what am I going to do? Yeah. It's the same. It's the same. As you said, the rock originally is the same. You've got the 100%, but how do I cut it away? How do I polish it? How do I present it? And suddenly it's a completely different thing. And I think that is something that, as you said, many people don't really take into consideration when they see a graph, for example. Where is the zero line? Is it logarithmic or not? Is it like, and so how did you come to research that? How do you get into this field even? What was like okay, I need to look at this.
Yeah, when I was a a freshman, I took in college, I took a course on statistics, and it was the usual mind-numbing stuff. Here's the formula for calculating chi-square and so on. And I I had a graduate student who was running the statistics lab, and he mentioned that there was a really good book called How to Lie with Statistics. Okay, this is a book that had been written 1950s. Okay, and I was a student in the 1960s, and so it was a reasonably recent book. And it was a little short book, and I went and got this book, and I read it, and it made a big impression on me, and it showed deceptive graphs and a variety of things like that, and I found it very entertaining. And then I went off and went to graduate school and became a sociologist, and at some point I discovered that this book was still in print, and I looked at it again. This is now 30 years later or so, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a good book. Made a big impression on me when I was a first-year student. But if as a sociologist, I think it might be interesting to approach this topic sociologically, to think about the social processes that are going into producing numbers, because his vision was that, well, there are people, maybe they have a political agenda, and so they set the graph up this way, or whatever, there was some kind of agenda. And I was thinking, no, there's something more than that. I'll go around and I will talk to groups of political conservatives, and they will tell me that bad statistics are produced by liberals. Okay, and then I'll go talk to liberals, and they will tell me that bad statistics are produced by conservatives. And I've come to the view that bad statistics are produced by people. Okay, and it just isn't. And what happens, of course, is that if we hear a statistic from somebody that we agree with, and we, and it's a statistic that makes a point that we agree with, we think, hey, that's pretty good. Maybe it's not a perfect number, but it gets at the underlying. When we hear a statistic from somebody that we disagree with, who is making a point that we don't agree with, we become analytic tigers, and we're saying, well, I don't know, where'd you get that number? How do you do that? Blah 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 blah. And I think that it's important, to the key step in critical thinking is always to be critical of your own ideas. Okay, it's easy to be critical of the people you disagree with, and it's more important to make sure that you understand what the assumptions you're making are. Anybody who does a piece of research realizes that in the course of doing that research, they are making choices. They've decided, I'm going to look at this and not that. I'm going to measure this way and not that way. I'm going to use this approach, analytic approach, and not that analytic approach. I'm going to incorporate these concepts and not those concepts. And anybody who's honest understands that somebody else trying to study the same thing might have made different choices. Okay, and you need to say to yourself, well, have I made good choices? Have I made choices that I can defend? Have I made choices that make sense? Am I lying to myself? And I think that's what's really going on. So I'm trying. I don't have an agenda. When I wrote my book, I actually, there are lots of books out there that will have an agenda, and they'll be left-wing books or right-wing books or whatever, and they'll present a bunch of facts, and I actually made a sheet of paper, and I drew a line down one side, and I listed on one side of the line the examples that would irritate people on the left, and the right side, the number of examples would irritate people on the right. And I made sure that at the end, when I had the book, I had about the same number, you know,
Yeah.
so because the point was that regardless of which particular things you believe, you need to be aware that the same kinds of stakes or the same kinds of preferences are getting used by people
Yeah.
that you agree with and people you don't.
Absolutely. I think that's where you said this. It's a bit of, it's just old school. It's a confirmation bias. I think the
Yeah.
word you use, this, oh, this statistic I like, and it gives me feedback for my worldview. Oh, it's gonna be all right. And this one, it's not. So, as you said, analytical tiger. I'm going to use those words. I think that's perfectly said. So, no, no, no. How did they come to the numbers? How did they source it? How did they cite it? What is going to, and suddenly, oh, and if I find one little thing where I might have chosen differently, I can say, see, they're biased. They're completely biased. That's why I don't care about these numbers. They're just, that's powerful. I gotta admit, that's powerful. It's like, I work with numbers myself. I do research, statistics, and such, not in the academic field, but like in the corporate field. So a business. So I understand the issues behind it. As you say, we all have to take certain decisions. I'm going to look at this or this. How am I going to look at all of this? For me personally, I got just a little story. For me, when I read Milgram's experiment, the book, I was, for the first time, for me personally, was that it was a huge impact to me, was the little part where he wrote at first why these experiments are not correct or proper, and where he described, hey, you gotta know, we only have volunteers here. That's already one subset of all people we know, so we don't even know what it would be like if we forced people into this experiment. And to me, I was younger back then, and it was like, wow, I never read that in any psychology or sociology study or anything. And it's such a game changer when you think about it, that to me, it created that a desire to say, okay, if I want my paper, my work to be serious, I myself have to be the worst critic, and I have to try to destroy what my result is. I have to destroy it honestly with all of my capabilities. And only if it survives that, then I can say I got something.
Yeah, this is why you have a methods section. I mean, when you're writing a research report, what you should do is you should say, this is how I got this, result. I looked at these things, I looked in this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the theory is that you can then, somebody could come along and they could replicate that. And if they do what you did, they should get the same results. And you can also say, well, I'm going to do it a little bit differently and see what the results are. And that's also, valuable information. Yeah. So, everybody's aware of this on some level. Although when we start talking about, political issues or, the issues of the day, where you've got a little stake invested in the debate and the outcome and so on, it's easy to forget this. And, everybody does.
It often gets lost in the translation from the academic field to the newspaper field, let's say it like that, to the media. It's like, that's why I started reading more the papers themselves instead of the media, because I just look for an article. Oh, that study says that. Okay, I need to read the study itself, at least a short summary, to get a feel what it is really about. Because the media often, it's like, it's not quite what the study really says. I mean, there are enough jokes of that in the field. That I'm curious, really, really curious about your opinion of something. I personally always thought, okay, there's, as you said, an agenda, either political or money or corporate or anything. And you say, no, no, no. I looked at it from a sociology standpoint. What was the difference? What was the result that you found? Is it more, no, it's just confirmation bias, psychology from the people who want to use it? Or is it more, no, no, it's a goal-driven thing with a lot of manipulation? What is it going on in the field?
Oh, I think there are lots of answers to that, depending upon what you're looking at. I think that all of those things come into play some of the time. Sometimes people are wedded. If you're having an election, you are. We all understand that the people in an election campaign are going to paint their candidate in the most favorable possible terms and look for information that supports them, and so on and so forth. Similarly, one of the hard lessons you learn when you're about 5 is that commercials are not true. They may not be false, but they portray a world that's not strictly speaking true. And when you're an adolescent, you learn that when somebody tells you how attractive you are, they may have an agenda there.
Yeah.
So we become aware of these agendas, to some degree, and we discount some of them, and but I think that it becomes more problematic when you're counting on people, you're counting on scientists, you're counting on the news media, to deliver you accurate information, and sometimes they do that less well than other times.
Very, very diplomatically said. Respect. That was nicely said. You said also something else that I'm very curious about, the shift of what is important to the people. It's like this topic is this year's hot topic, this topic is next year's hot topic. Did you find any like rhythm or reason on how and why that changes, or is it just random?
Well, sometimes, there are lots of answers to that question too. Sometimes, something will happen. There'll be a catastrophe of some kind. A natural disaster or something, and that focuses attention on things and say, wow, oh, what's happening here? What's going on here? I think that it's also very important to understand that there's a kind of boredom that takes hold. That is, there's a famous article got written, this is a long time ago, called "Up and Down with Ecology," and it was written during the early years of the environmental movement. And the guy postulated that at the start you could get everybody excited and you can say, okay, we're going to really do something about the environment. We've really got to clean up the environment and so on. And over time, people realize that, well, this is complicated. It may be expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, there isn't, a breaking news story. And partly what you've got is people in the news media that thrive on the idea that they're going to deliver something new. That's why we call it news, right? It's novel. It's exciting, and it becomes boring after a while, whatever it is. Okay, there are in criminology. There are stories about crime waves, and the media will announce, oh, this kind of crime is taking off, and there'll be a lot of attention paid to it for a time. And then people, at some point, that becomes an old story. There isn't a new example of that crime. And, the media are then out looking for some other story. So, I think that sometimes, somebody does a good job of drawing attention to something. There's a book published, or something that gets draws people attention to things. Sometimes it's current events. There is just this continual effort out there to find something new, and you have to remember. I think of there being a marketplace for social problems, and by a marketplace, I mean the kind of bazaar like you see in an Indiana Jones movie, where there are all these people hawking rugs and copper pots and things like that. And everybody's trying to say, look, buy my rug, buy my this, buy my that. And in the same way, you've got, people who have different causes that they want to draw attention to. Worry about my disease, worry about my kind of inequality, worry about my kind of crime, worry about my injustice. And so they're always out there trying to get attention. And, the merry-go-round goes around, and it'll be your turn at some point. But after you have your time in the spotlight, attention is likely to shift. And what is it going to go to? You can't really predict, but you can predict that people aren't going to stay focused on something for an incredibly long time.
I think that's a very, very interesting metaphor and a very interesting take, a marketplace of issues. And like media, as I said, they need it. You don't want to hear the same stuff for 5 months on the media. It's like a news every day the same. I don't want. It's interesting take. True. It's really true. It's like entertainment. Nobody wants to watch the same movie for the 20th time each week, every Monday the same movie. We want to see something else. So they have to shift the focus from issue 1 to issue 2 to issue 3. It's of course, and then there are a myriad of variables that decide which is going to be the next issue that we as a collective are going to focus on. Very interesting take. If I would like to ask, because you research also interesting other topics, but I would like just 1 or 2 more questions on this about the statistics and numbers, because as you said, the numbers make it more real and more factual. So the question for me would be, like, let's imagine I want my issue to get the attention. What are some tricks that I could use with my statistics? What are some of those things that you found out or read about or know that are used to create the narrative? How can I fudge the data? What could I do to make the narrative that I want to push as interesting or as I don't know if it's just interesting, but like as strong as possible for people to take over?
Okay. Yeah. My view is that, and I'm in the States, and I don't know. I have trouble believing that it's a whole lot different in Europe, but I don't know. My thought is that there is a basic 3-part recipe that people use in promoting a social problem. And the first part of the recipe is to have a really awful example, okay, of something, okay, a murdered child, whatever it is, and this is, this grabs people's attention, okay, and a lot of times you'll see a magazine article that will start this way, or a TV news broadcast, and there'll be some appealing, vulnerable person who's been harmed in some way. Okay, and that's the first part. The second part is you have to name the problem. And so what you're doing is you're saying that this incident, this example that I've just told you about, it is not just a terrible thing that happened to somebody, but it is an instance of a larger problem, and you give that problem a name. Okay. Now, and that name can be missing children, child abuse, whatever it is. And it is very important to understand that you don't need to define that problem. You almost never need to actually spell out what is a missing child or what is a case of child abuse, because you've already exemplified it. Okay, you've said, and you can think about this as a typifying example. When you think about child abuse, you should think about a case like this. Okay. Now, the important thing to understand is that there is no need for the typifying example to be typical. Okay. What it needs to do is scare the pants off people. It needs to be, gripping. All right. And so, you exemplified, let's say, child abuse by taking some kid who's beaten to death. Okay, now the proportion of cases of child abuse where somebody's beaten to death is infinitesimally small. Okay, it's going to be a tiny fraction of all of the cases of child abuse, but that becomes the emblematic one. Okay, and then the third part of the recipe is you add a number. Okay, and the number is going to be typically as big as you can make it. Okay, it is going, because what you're trying to say is, here's an awful case. Okay, and this is a case of this problem, and how many of this problem are there? Lots. Okay, and so it's really remarkable in the United States. We'll get news stories that God packages social problems in even millions. So you'll be told there are 1 million cases of elder abuse each year. There are 2 million missing children each year. There are 3 million homeless each. Et cetera, et cetera. And right away, alarm bells should go off. Isn't it remarkable that the world has social problems, in appearing in even millions? So right away, that this is kind of a guess. It may be a guess by somebody who's perfectly sincere, and notice, you don't want to discount that, you don't want to treat these people as cynical. They're not. If your child was kidnapped, okay, and you start hanging out in a group of people who had kidnapped children, you enter into a kind of hothouse atmosphere where you are listening to all these stories of kidnapped children, and there are a lot of these stories, and you say, this is a big problem. All these people I talk to have stories just like that. This is a giant problem. And so when some reporter says to you, how many people are there like this? You may create some number and say, well, I don't know, millions. Maybe there are 2 million. Okay. Well, nobody's done a count. Nobody has defined missing child, for starters. And this number then takes on a life of its own. One of the things that's very entertaining to do is, if you go back to when a social problem first emerges, and somebody will produce a statistic, and you'll see that statistic get repeated again and again and again and again and again, because the reporter is not going to go out and do his own count. He's going to look at what other people have reported, and somebody else used this number. In fact, a lot of people seem to be using this number. I guess everybody agrees this is the right number, and the number takes on a life of its own. So and it's not that that missing children isn't a problem. It's not that you don't know a lot of people who have missing children, but when you start flinging around numbers, and I use the missing children case because this is kind of a classic case where the media were all reporting that there were 2 million American kids going missing each year, and then somebody sat down and thought, well, how many cases does the FBI investigate of kidnapped children? And it turned out it was under 100. Okay, so what is the gap between the claim that there are 2 million missing kids each year, and the idea that the FBI is investigating less than 100 cases?
Wow.
Why would that exist? And the answer is, when you think about missing children, the typifying example is always some kid that was kidnapped and murdered. Okay, and it scares the hell out of you. Terrible story, awful story, a true story. If this does happen, and it's serious. But a typical missing child, is a 14-year-old girl who gets into an argument with her parents about can she pierce her ears or whatever the thing they want to do this year is, And her parents tell her no, and she gets mad and she walks out of the house and slams the door and goes to her best friend's house and doesn't tell her parents where she's going and stays there for 2 nights and then comes home. Okay. Now, if I told you that story and I said, this is the story of Allison, and Allison, got into an argument with her parents at age 14 and left for 2 nights, you'd say, yeah, okay, that's okay. But if you say Allison is a missing child, there are 2 million missing children here, you'd say, that's okay. That, if that's what we're counting, who cares? But what we do is we take the murdered child, we say, this is a missing child. There are 2 million of these each year. And suddenly we've got a giant national social problem. And we do this again and again and again.
If I can summarize it, it sounds like 3 steps, very interesting. First, I think it reminds me a bit, just recently had a work about it, like ethos, logos, and pathos. First, the pathos, we need the strong emotional hook. Like it's got to go into your core, not your intellect, not your consciousness. It's got to go straight into basic of your emotional being. Yep. And that's the anchor. That's what we're going to use as the anchor. That's from now on. Next step is the logos. We need the word. Okay, the ethos depends. But like now we, as you said, we define it, but we don't really define it.
Yeah.
We keep it as vague as possible because the only thing that you should connect with this definition or the naming is your emotional reaction and the images you had from the anchor. We don't want you to think about it. We just want you to be in the feeling of that anchor moment when you heard about the anchor. And now that we have you anchored and we have you associated with a word, or some words, but a terminology for it. Now we're going to give you the reality facts of numbers, and the numbers are the thing that materializes all of it. Like now, it's not just a vague feeling. It's nothing. It's a reality in this world, and the number automatically in your brain, in your head, will be connected to the anchor. It's not about the definition. It's not about what this is. It's about you will feel the number multiplied with the emotion you had with the anchor.
Yeah.
And that's now the social problem that you perceive to exist in society.
Yeah.
That's an interesting take. And now, because I'm a bit of a greedy guy, I have to think about how can a company use that to their benefit to make money. It's like, of course, sorry, I immediately think about that, how very interesting how that's done. Really, really interesting. That's wow. Of course.
Well, I don't know that it's. I don't know that it's all that different from the way that you do, marketing campaigns and commercials and so on. That you, instead of having a terrifying example, you have an ecstatic example of somebody who's, whose life is made wonderful by some product.
Become pretty, become beautiful, become rich, become successful. Yeah. We all know these examples, but that's what I mean. The story, the hook, how the anchor, because I know from experience, for example, when you tell people many people were successful with this, it doesn't work as well as when you say 30 people or more than 70 people made more than 30% more money with this method. And then it's like, okay, now they get numbers. And if you use numbers like 27% instead of a round number, they're even more like, okay, that's got to be the truth. I mean, of course, there's always the part of the cynical people who say, I don't care about the numbers. I don't care about what you say. I think you all lie all the time. Of course, they exist. But for the vast majority of people, numbers work. They really do work and ground it into reality. And if possible, I don't know how much time you got, because we're at the 40 minutes mark, but I would love to, if you're free, we didn't even get to the other huge parts of your research. What I also thought very, very interesting, white collar crime and like how should I say it, more traditional, what people perceive as crime with the drug crimes. And it's like, you use the word, the construction of white collar crime. Now, for the viewers, what In what context?
You
use the word construction.
You keep saying that. And I really haven't written. I don't want to say that I've never written about white collar crime, but it isn't something that I really know about or that I've studied.
Okay. Maybe a mistake for me. I had it in the genre of sociology.
I've written a lot about different crime waves. Freeway violence and things like that. And part of what you need to understand is that I'm trying to understand, these dynamics of social problems, and a lot of times, I will just notice something, and I will think, oh yeah, that's kind of an example of a more general process. Okay, and so I haven't really had substantive things. I mean, I wrote. I've written about very strange things. I've written about sex bracelets. Do you know what a sex bracelet is?
Okay.
You know what this is?
Please tell me.
Okay. These are little plastic bracelets that are worn by school children. Okay, they're thin plastic. Okay. And there was a story in the United States that these bracelets were color coded. Okay. And each color represented a different sexual act. Okay. And if somebody grabbed one of your sex bracelets and broke it, you had to perform the sexual act of this color. Now, this is ridiculous. Okay. But this got a lot of media attention. I've written a lot about poisoned Halloween candy, which is something that
each year.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like if it was a huge issue, but it's not.
No. I can't find. I've done research and I can't find any evidence that any child's ever died this way.
It's kind of so interesting. Like this urban myth. We know it all from childhood, when in the school and there was like that rumor and how it spread. Nobody knew, but everybody knew about it. And isn't it kind of funny that as an adult, it's still the same. It's really the same with national and international news. It's like it's at the same level. It's like gossip from the playground, but it's spread. How that works, I think that the type of research you do, and that is so interesting. Like how do these things create? How do they start, and why are they pushed?
So there are all these things, and I'll pick up something because it lets me see a different angle on social problems, and I'll think, oh well, that's something I haven't really noticed before. So I've been interested. Americans, I wrote a book about the belief that American education is just going to hell. Okay, Americans, Americans are always convinced that schools in the United States are doing a bad job. Okay, the students aren't studying, the teachers aren't teaching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's getting worse and worse and worse over decades. Always. I know the narrative.
And what I did, which was kind of fun, was I took contemporary 21st century examples of people saying this, and then I went back 25 years, went back a generation, and what were they saying? Saying the same thing. I went back 25 years before that, and they're saying the same thing. And you can go back to the 1840s. Now, the 1840s are when public education starts in the United States. And in the 1840s, there were people worrying that schools weren't as good as they used to be. Okay. And, so there is, and that's not to say that education's perfect. Of course, education's perfect, but the idea that we tell ourselves this story that, oh, it's awful. And what's really interesting is if you do surveys, and you ask people, how is education in the United States? They will say, education in the United States, you know, just going to hell in a handbasket. How's your kid's school? Great. My kid is getting a great education. You know, and you know, and they do this all the
sorry,
time.
wait, give me a second. Wait. I would not have believed that. I would have thought they would say, "Oh no, my child's school is bad." I would not have believed not that they say, "Oh, my child's school is great."
We talk about, you know, if you ask people, what do you think of Congress? Okay,
Yes.
they think Congress is a cesspool. What do you think of your congressional representative? Great. Okay.
Wow.
And if you ask them, you know, how is the economy? Economy, oh, terrible. You know, how are your how are your prospects? Good. You know, so you know, this is a very common problem with surveys. If you ask people, you know, if I, you know, you could make something up. You could say, are you concerned about snarfnagels? You know, and you could get people to say, yes, I'm very concerned about the snarfnagel problem. You know, and they have no idea what it is. Do you personally have a problem with snarfnagels? No.
Isn't that kind of a cognitive dissonance if you say, "Oh, school awful, but my school is great"? Isn't there like something where you perceive reality differently in the abstract than in your personal experience?
Well,
Isn't
I don't know. You know, I live in a big country, right? You know, I mean, it's geographically, you know, and you know, so it's possible, I think, for people to think, well, someplace else, you know, everything's going to hell, and you know,
over there.
Yeah. In fact, all other places.
I'm in that little part that's nice, but the country's big and the rest is going down, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you know, on the one hand, you know, there's the American culture is one that is, you know, we celebrate the American dream. We celebrate the idea that people can, you know, anybody can get ahead, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, people believe that in the sense that they, you know, they can often tell you a very personal story, you know, that, you know, this is where I started and this is where I got to, or this is where my parents started and this is where I got to, or this is where my grandparents started and this is where I got to, you know, and, you know, so they see that as a kind of validation. But at the same time, they're willing to say, oh no, you know, there's terrible inequality. Well, there's always terrible inequality, you know, and you know, people overcome this, you know, in various degrees. And so, you know, there is a, you know, there's a confusion about how to think about my life in the larger world. And you know, it is, if you ask, you know, and you know, there is a kind of pessimism, and the pessimism, I think, comes from, you know, the news media, because the news media does, you know, people complain that there's no good news, but of course there's no good news. Good news isn't news, you know. So they're constantly going to tell you what you ought to be alarmed about, and but it creates a kind of sense that, well, every place else, everything's going to hell.
Interesting, very interesting. But I know some projects that tried it, like positive news, and it didn't work. It's just not interesting enough for people to zoom in, to switch in all the time. It's just, you know, we like drama. I recently read a paper. I don't know how the name of the researcher. It was a lady. She was an anthropologist, and she thinks it's evolutionary important for humans, and that's why we are wired to be interested in negative stories, because it's more important for us to survive, to know how did he get hurt, how did he, what is danger, what is that. It's better for us to be interested in these stories than in the positive ones. The positive ones are more important to like grow up, to have a role model. So really interesting take. I hope I can have her on that show too. But, and that's the last little topic that I'm curious about. You also wrote about, how should I say it? Let me, not that I make, you know, the congratulatory culture. Everyone's a winner. It's like celebrating mediocrity. What is your no. I mean, wait. Let me. I'm not saying that it's like I'm throwing it out. Like as you said, we need the pathos. We need the people to be emotional about it. So, what is your take on it? How did you get to the topic? And what did you research and what did you find about it?
Okay. Well, the first thing that you know, my research, you could look at prizes, and you can do this with anything. I read a lot of detective stories, and so I did prizes for detective fiction. Okay, and if you the first prizes that I know of for detective fiction were at the end of the Second World War. Okay, and in the United States, there was the Mystery Writers of America started awarding 4 prizes each year. Okay, and now I don't know. I haven't done this research recently, but there are way more than 100 prizes for detective fiction each year. And if you look at sociology, sociologists started awarding a Best Book Prize in the 1950s. Okay, today there are, dozens, well over 100, prizes. If you take prizes for students, there are hundreds of prizes for students. And you look around and you realize that we live in a world where there are lots and lots of prizes, and I got to this topic because I was reading the newspaper one day and I thought, it's amazing how much of the news is about prizes, and people know about the Oscars or whatever it is. And I started thinking, this is interesting because, this obviously it's a sociological phenomenon, where is, who's written about this? And I thought, and I couldn't figure out anybody who had written really about it. So I started looking into it a little bit. And what you realize is that prizes are proliferating. And it is, a lot of times people will describe society, and they'll describe society as though there is one society. There's one pyramid in your world, in your town or whatever, and there's somebody at the top, and you're down here someplace, and you know where everybody is. But that isn't actually how we live life. We live life in little social worlds. Okay, one of my hobbies is I build things with Lego.
Oh, cool!
And I go to Lego conferences. Okay, and they're this is little conventions where people who build things with Lego bring what they built, and they're very sweet occasions. People walk around and everybody's very positive, and you say, "Oh, I really like the way you did that," and it's a lot of fun, and you realize that there are all of these different visions. People are playing with the same blocks, but they see all kinds of possibilities with this. Okay, and there are prizes for that. Okay, and you think about the world, and now I don't know what's like in Europe, but in the United States, we'll have a lot of times around kindergarten, age 5, 6. We'll start having kids go into sports like, soccer. Okay, little tiny kids playing soccer, and at the end of the season, they'll typically get a little trophy. Okay, and by the time you're in 3rd grade, at the top of your dresser in your bedroom has all of these little trophies for things. And you think about it, and the number of prizes that are being awarded each year is in the millions. Okay, and so it's not that there's some pinnacle and there's somebody up here getting the one Oscar. It's that we reward everybody for this, and so everybody has a sense that in their world, they're making a contribution, they're receiving recognition, whatever it is. Maybe it's the Lego world or the sociology world or whatever it is. And I think this is an important part of American culture. People used to worry that we were going to have a mass society, and in a mass society, everyone would be just the same. We'd all be these little faceless eunuchs, and we'd have no individual identities and so on. That's not what's happened. What's happened is we have proliferated all of these little worlds where you can get attention, you can get rewards, you can get satisfactions.
That's something interesting where I learned it too because of the internet. A lot of that became even faster and more creative because suddenly you could find for the most niche little things, you could find worldwide your 5 or 10,000 people. I mean, imagine that 5,000 people around the world is like nothing. Potential, it's like almost nobody. But if you have a place to meet 5,000 people who are into the same thing, that's quite a community. You got to imagine that. So you have,
and this becomes social problems. Okay, child pornographers can find one another. There aren't that many fans of child pornography, but the internet has made it possible for them to connect on the dark web and exchange stuff and so on. But the same thing happens, as you say, with countless, you like knitting, whatever it is.
I just recently saw a documentary about a little robot competition with mice. Yeah. That's why I thought of that. It's like it became international but now I got out of it. I wanted to ask something. Yeah, right. About this. Isn't that kind of what? I haven't read all of his works either, like what Jordan Peterson says with the dominance hierarchy, but there are many different ones. And you as a human step from one into another, like maybe, let's example, I'm not the best brother, but I'm the best Lego builder. And so I'm very high there, but I'm bad at my job. So there I'm very low, but I'm very attractive. So there I'm higher again, and I make a lot of money. And then it depends a bit. It reminds me of Milgram with this, into which situation do I come? I step into a room, into a group. Our brains are wired very well to analyze this. The context of what situation am I in, and in what position am I? So that's a very interesting take for me too. Is it a bit that what you're talking about with we created even more of those? Yeah, and each of them, each of them rewards their higher dominant people, like their competence. That's a very interesting take. Huh?
Yeah. I think that it's a way to make living in a very large, very complex society livable. It makes it bearable. You have a sense of identity. You have a sense of who you are. And the internet, has absolutely made it possible to find people that share your interests, and etc.
Wow, really interesting. That's like, I remember that the brain is wired for a certain amount of people to really connect to. And as you said, the world is big, there are many people. So we create our little subcultures, our little niches to say, okay, in this world, in this city with millions of people, this is my tribe. This is the tribe in which I care about, the little pyramid where I'm positioned. Those are the values. Those are the people that I care about.
And notice that everybody can have. You can be in 20 tribes.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that you should be in one.
Of course, I think that's another beautiful thing about humans. Like on Saturday, you go to your music band and you enjoy this kind of life, and then 3 hours later, you could be at your book club. Really interesting. That's wow, really nice. I got to say, we spent a lot of time to talk. I've got 2 more pages of questions that I could ask you, but I don't want to annoy you too much and to be too greedy. I think it was really interesting to talk to you. It was really a pleasure. I think your work is awesome. Really, how you all the viewers, please look at his work. It's awesome. It's really interesting to understand how social narratives, how these problems are created, are talked about, and are perpetuated in a way. It's really, really interesting. Alone the paper about the Halloween candy, I think that was like, because everybody knows each year it happens again, and to find a researcher who says, okay, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to really look into it. How is it spread? How is it happening? I found it really awesome. I thank you very much for your time. I wish you and your family just the very, very best.
Oh, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun. Bye-bye.